welcome. Um, Ben Shahn is quite a relevant character at this stage of the game. It is the mission of art to remind man from time to time that he is human, and the time is ripe just now, today, for such a reminder. This show that's on at the Jewish Museum, um, Ben Shahn on Nonconformity, examines the prolific and progressive artist's commitment to chronicling and confronting critical issues of his era, and you might say of ours also, spanning from the Great Depression to the Vietnam War, as well as his exploration of spirituality and Jewish texts, featuring 175 artworks and objects from the 1930s to the 1960s, including paintings, mural studies, prints, photographs, commercial designs, and ephemera. The exhibit highlights the enduring relevance of Shahn's art across media, while revealing new insights into the complexity of his aesthetic and his decisive shift from documentary to allegorical and poetic styles in pursuit of visual language that would resonate widely. The exhibit draws its title from Shahn's credo of nonconformity, which the artists asserted as an indispensable precondition for both significant artistic production and all great social change. This philosophy is centered in the exhibition as the foundational thread that runs through the artist's work, which investigates issues on unemployment, discrimination, authoritarianism, and the threat to freedom of expression, while championing labor, civil, and human rights. Shahn's later spiritual work, which embraces Hebrew language and Bible stories, also reflects his exploration of traditional social justice activism within Jewish culture. So, I am not going to talk about the image on the left at this point. I'll come back to it later, but there's quite a bit to talk about there. And you see this face, that's Ben Shahn. All right. So here is a young Ben Shahn. Basically this is not him. It's not a self-portrait, but it's a painting from 1920, and the painting in the center at the top reminds me very much of Van Gogh's kind of peasant paintings, the potato eaters, and that whole period. So I'm going to go on and do his little bio stuff on him. Shahn was born in Kaunas, Lithuania. His dates were 1898 to 1969. Best known as a social realist, though he would not like to be labeled as anything. As we shall see, he was a modernist. And so it's realism with an attitude. So when he was born, Lithuania was part of the Russian Empire. His father was exiled to Siberia for anti-czarist revolutionary activity. So this had a very early impact on him. The family immigrated to the US in 1906. Shahn basically was a very inquisitive guy. He loved reading, loved learning, but his family, due to their financial condition, needed him to bring in money. So his mother had him quit school and at 14 and apprenticed to a litho shop, first learning to create text, handwritten, basically very, very disciplined practice. And he, through that, learned all aspects of lithography. His father later escaped Siberia and joined the family in Brooklyn. Let's see. Okay. And although Shahn at 19 attended New York University as a biology student, he went on to pursue art at City College in 1921, and then at the National Academy. After his marriage to Tilly Goldstein in 1924, they traveled through North Africa to Europe, where he made the traditional artist pilgrimage, studied the European artists such as Matisse, Dufay, Georges Rouault, Picasso, Klee, Cézanne, all affected him, though they were not satisfactory in certain ways. He did have a real affinity for the early Renaissance, like Giotto and Cimabue. They went to Italy and he studied them, and the simplification and strong beginnings of perspectival use affected him. It basically they spent a good few years in Europe and then came back to the United States. Let's see, we're going to go make a jump here to, here we go. I'm going to talk about Sacco and Vanzetti a bit here because this was a breakthrough for Shahn's work in getting him notoriety and recognition in the art world. Basically, the Sacco and Vanzetti story is these two immigrants basically were accused of robbing and killing a guard. They went on trial. The trial went on for, I don't know, something like 7 years. And there was a lot of questionable forces, political and investigative, questionable practices that were brought to bear, questioning them for long periods of time. They were both fairly uneducated. One was a fish salesman. The other one, I can't remember what he was, but it was, very much street activity. They were both activists, but the question of whether they actually did this robbery and did the murder is still anyone's guess. But the way it looks is they were railroaded, and that was kind of the stand that was taken. So he did a series of 23 gouache paintings of the trials of Sacco and Vanzetti, and communicated the political concerns of his time, rejecting the academic prescriptions for subject matter. The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti was exhibited in 1932 and received acclaim from both the public and critics. This series gave Shahn the confidence to cultivate his personal style, regardless of society's art standards. So the three characters standing off to the left, that the trial was so controversial that the two university presidents and a judge were called in to review all the facts in the case, and it was their judgment that actually brought them to the execution. And you see the two faces in the coffins, and the kind of dispassionate or bored looks on the faces of the three judges. Quite interesting. Oh, okay, went too far. Okay. I'm going to make a jump here to just give you a glimpse of Shahn's later work. Shahn's social realist vision informed his approach to art. His examination of the status quo inspired this examination of the status quo inspired his creative process. Although he often explored the polemic themes of modern urban life, organized labor, immigration, and injustice, he also maintained a compassionate tone. Shahn identified himself as a communicative artist, challenging the esoteric pretenses of art. He believed these things disconnected artists and their work from the public. As an alternative, he proposed an intimate and mutually beneficial relationship between the artist and audience. So he really did have a relationship to the public, and made sure that there was a bridge to his work and that it was accessible. I'm stubborn. I paint two things: what I love and what I abhor. And here we have an elder statesman down below. This shot was from the 60s. he, in keeping with his lithography shop mentality, he always called his studio the shop rather than calling it a studio. Uh, so here's Shahn with his wife Tilly and daughter at 23 Bethune Street in 1932. And he became really close with Walker Evans, the photographer, and I will show you some examples of his work. And actually, this photograph of Ben, Tilly, and their daughter, Judith, is one of his shots. On the right is one of Ben Shahn's paintings of Walker Evans. Okay, so I have a quote here from Walker Evans. We had a great attachment to each other, Shahn and I. Also, he was an overpowering man, which I began to resent. He was too strong for me, but I knew I was getting educated. After all, a little boy from Kenilworth, Illinois, had never seen anybody like that, the son of a Russian immigrant, really right out of the streets, tough. I see that there was a question. Let me see what's going on with that. Short chat. I'm not seeing it. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Okay. So all the things I thought were exotic and fascinating, it was very marvelous. I was attached to his work and loved it. I still do to this day. Shahn's work went in and out of fashion. At a certain point, he was really recognized as one of the, in the 50s, as one of the best artists in America. But that was also in the 50s, the time of abstract expressionism, and his work was figurative, it was political, it was, you know, uh, in some people's opinion at the time, old hat. Well, things come around. Uh, so here's a quote from Shahn. I thought I could always ask Walker to show me what to do and so on with the camera. It was a kind of indefinite promise that he made. One day when he was going off to the South Seas, I was helping him into the taxi and I said, Walker, remember you promised to show me how to photograph. He said, well, it's easy, Ben. F9 on a sunny side of the street, F4.5 on the shady side. So hold your camera steady. After meeting and working and sharing a studio with Evans, Shahn incorporated photography into his painting practice and even took some strictly photograph-based commissions, shamelessly making pictures from photographs. Okay, and here is a set of photographs from Walker Evans. And they're quite potent. These were, part of the WPA. And below on the left is actually one of Ben Shahn's photographs, and you see the little line drawing, the lithograph that's in there. that's one of Shahn's drawings using this reference point. And I'm going to show you a lot more of that. It's kind of really interesting how he really condensed those images and was able to get an essential quality out of them. Okay. And so this is from Scotts Run, West Virginia, during the Great Depression. Shahn felt sympathy for the Americans suffering from the deprivations he grew up with. So this was a miners' strike, and he went down to cover that for the WPA at that point, 1935. By this time, there were strains in his relationship with his first wife, with Tilly. They were pretty much alienated, and he was living with the woman who he would spend the rest of his life with at that point. I'm not sure exactly when the divorce happened, but it was in the works at this stage of the game. His second wife, or the woman that he lived with the rest of his life, was Bernarda, and they actually married in 1965, just before his death. They shared. She was a lithographer. She was an artist, photographer, and worked along with him on mural projects, which we'll talk more about. Okay, and here is an example of how he recycled and reused these photographic images. The Temper from 1943 was really, basically about the prison camps that were being discovered at that time, not being spoken very much of in 1943. So this was a rather controversial piece of attention that Shahn was bringing to it. So he was commissioned by the Farm Services Administration to take these photographs. But again, recycled back into, register to vote. This wonderful gnarled hand, this distortion and use of a more kind of expressive quality. It reminds me very much of Kalowitz, Kathy Kalowitz, the German expressionists. And he would have known her work. He really was aware of everything that was going on, because they spent from 1924 to 1927 in Europe, traveling around. So they would have been in Germany and would have seen the exhibitions that were taking place there. Okay. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about is his use of line, and this kind of jagged line that he would use. A very there's a tension and a kind of strength to his simplification, but also directness in the contour, and the use of thick to thin, that kind of expressive force that comes out of this searching line. This quote over here was some of the writings from one of the either Sacco or Vanzetti, and it's in broken English, um, but it really speaks to how they felt that their their loss, the loss of their lives, served a purpose because it brought consciousness to the American people of the inequity that 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 they were trying to fight for. Okay, the Dust Bowl. So um, again, he did a number of posters for the WPA. Um, uh, this unemployment uh, painting is really um, it's a gouache, but you see again, you see that really strong expressive line in there. And I don't have the photograph that this was done from, but he drew it directly from those people. But in looking at the distortions and looking at the expressions on the faces of these guys, they're very powerful and potent. Again, looking at the photograph, looking at the painting, and how Ben Shahn used distortion to add force, add power to the image. I mean, those big arms on that standing figure, and the kind of twists in the face of the seated figure, um, and bringing that shopkeeper into the picture, tilting him in, and also, you know, these, if you look down underneath the arm of the standing figure, you see the reflection of two guys out there. And, they look like suits. They look like they could be detectives. Who knows what that's all about? But they're very mysterious paintings with um, interesting narratives kind of implicit in them. Okay. Again, miners' strike, steelworkers' strike, you know, they cross over. A lot of turbulence in those times. And Shahn was a civil rights advocate um, in a very early time, 1935. He got into some scuffles down south when he was down there photographing sharecroppers and photographing the conditions that were in society. These folks speak for themselves. Again, there's a photograph of this. I didn't put it in, but very powerful. This use of strong color. I mean, this scarlet really brings your attention, and the fact that they're sitting in this park bench, um, this green park bench in front of these red girders. Quite interesting. Okay. Shahn, with his drawings for the Homestead mural from 1938, here he is working on it. And this stayed as a drawing and was installed um, in a custom designed gallery in the U.S. Post Office in courtroom in Camden, New Jersey. Um, the murals were a source of income. In fact, his reputation out of the Sacco and Vanzetti series um, drew the attention of Diego Rivera. And when Diego Rivera was commissioned to do a mural for Rockefeller Center, he asked Shahn to come on with him and be an assistant in the process of doing that mural. And they worked it up. And basically, what happened with that mural is Rivera included a portrait of Lenin in there leading the people. And uh, Rockefeller did not like that at all and asked him to paint it out. And Diego Rivera refused to do that. And the entire mural was painted over. Um, Now, the the um, the composition in Diego Rivera's work was very complex, and for me, I look at Rivera's compositions, and many of them are just way too much going on. Um, and one of the things that I love about Shahn is he used deep recessions of space with human and architectural details projecting forward. He used a montage kind of amalgam of people and cultures populating the urban landscape, um, using multiple layers of perspective, fusing the portraits and complex industrialized system. Um, the murals maintain their humanity. Basically, his figures have a monumental quality in volume and scale, but they're not um, uh, confused or um, uh, muffled by the amount of stuff that he pours in there, the amount of people and all that. He was very discriminating about how he put his composition together. Um, this Jersey homestead mural was something that was actually part of a big project that was one of the WPA projects, basically creating a community where they built a whole town or development of these economically feasible houses that people were, basically um, uh, they were at a rate that people could afford to buy into. And so actually Shahn and his wife, or mistress, or whatever you want to call her, hit, bought in to this project in Roosevelt, New Jersey, and actually lived there the rest of their lives, on and off when they weren't traveling. Okay. But always back to the street. Handball, 1939. Gouache on paper, 23 by 31. And you see the photograph on the right that he used as the model for the project. Okay, here's another one of his, the meaning of Social Security mural that was down in DC, and he and his wife worked together on it. And this is a detail of one section, harvesting wheat. During the war years, he was hired to make posters, make patriotic posters, and the government, basically very few of these got used. Too graphic and gritty. They were looking for more rah red, white, and blue patriotics, rather than the horror that we were fighting. These are much more reminiscent of Katkowitz and that sort of social cause. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this piece. Italian landscape, 1930, 1943, 44. It really was kind of straight out of the newspapers, seeing the devastation that was going on in Europe. And notice that none of these women are looking at each other. The sense of grief and loss could have been a New York Times photograph from last week. None of them look at each other, aside from the one who has her back to us, and she's looking at the coffin being carried out. So, there's this 3 ages of women business going on. Very powerful piece. And anything adapted into artwork, regardless of whether it was inspiration from his photographs or from a newspaper article, generated source material for him. It was really kind of a fascinating technique. He would use different pieces and patch them together, using his photographic archive or newspaper articles, insights into the larger humanistic project. A close study of events and injustices around the world ultimately gave voice to a more universal human experience. Shahn's paintings, especially the ones about the destruction of war, inspire a sense of terrible but important recognition. Perhaps this is why so much of his work feels so significant today. He found a way to represent the essence of momentous feelings and events. Shahn's works don't respond to the atrocities of his own time. They have an uncanny ability to continue to speak. So, in the face of all this, kids will be kids and find a way to play their way through the devastation. Again, the post war disruption, um, hunger, migration, um, basically were the fodder that he worked with, especially in the post-war years. And again, back to one of his early photographs from 1935 and using that material. There's a combination of realism and modernism, this translucent technique, the reuse of images, the kind of transparency and translucence in this beautiful nocturne. Um, he was a wonderful draftsman and a great colorist. You know, there's a they they are um, distilled. It's taking realism and pushing it to another place. Um, there, there's also a real abstract sensibility to these pieces. That the forms and shapes, the interaction, positive and negative forms, and all that are really well done and fit into modernism. At the time, let's see, 1954, he had a one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art, and it was a, a real hit with audiences. But this was the same time, let's see, 1957, he and Willem de Kooning were the two representatives from the United States to the Venice Biennale. And Shahn's work got panned by Clement Greenberg. Basically, Greenberg was a great was a big high blown critic at the time, and was really behind the abstract expressionists and pushing them as the evolution of art, and looked at anything that was figurative and political as passe. So although Shahn's work continued to be popular with the public at large, he did not get critical acclaim from the art world. Um, Things look a little different now, but I mean, there's a lot of artists that are involved in politics, and it's an integrated part of their work. And looking at a lot of these pieces, they could have been done by artists that are very active today. Um, and the play between politics and social social issues, always to the foreground. A good man is hard to find, and if you look at that portrait of Truman at the piano, and the fellow that's on the piano is Thomas Dewey, who was the Republican at the time. This was Progressive Party's poster that Shahn did. Pretty funny. And here's another. Political, not too puff piece. And coming from the German expressionists and the new objectivity school in Germany, which again would have been something that Shahn really knew about and integrated into the United States, integrated into his work. Um, it's this mix of social and political commentary. This is much more allegorical. If we knew who all these characters were and what they represented, Beckmann was very much into that game. And again, Shahn loved Paul Klee. He just loved his work. So there is again that this play between modernism and social realism, this mushroom cloud image, the second allegory from 1953. And then you look in that, the subatomic diagrams that are scratched into the surface of that second allegory painting. And here we are, Allegory. And there's this group of dead bodies underneath there, shots from the atomic bomb and things like that, really had an impact. And let's not forget Gandhi. And basically, again, looking at that Paul Klee piece and looking at this back to the streets business. Paul Klee, New York, 1947. Okay. And one of the other things that I wanted to touch on was his graphic career. Basically, he did book covers, he did magazine covers, he did litho work throughout his life. He did prints, and those were widely distributed and bought by the general public. Um, Wonderful, whimsical. Again, there's I think of Chagall with the violin player, the fiddle player, um, and these hands growing up out of the ground. Um, Solidarity. So he really did mix his the um, the Hebrew tradition into his work, that regard for humanity. Um, so this was, a year before he died, um, and the year that Martin Luther King passed. Okay. So actually, this Sacco and Vanzetti mosaic was executed in 1967 at Syracuse University. So it's a huge mosaic that's on the campus. Um, and this show at the Jewish Museum is on through October 12th. If you have a chance, go see it. Um, there is also this great YouTube from PBS, and it's about 7 years old, but it's aged well and well worth the watching. So you can actually just plug in Ben Shahn, Passion for Justice, and you can tune in for another hour of more in-depth um, interviews with people who knew him, and um, historians that could speak to many aspects of his work that I didn't get to. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll I will see you in a couple of weeks. If you have a chance to come to the jazz concert next Friday, that would be great. Um, and I'll see you. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, let's see. Did anything come up? No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for coming.